All right. And then I'm going to go ahead and just share my whole desktop. All right, so everybody can see my desktop now. Ish. See Android Studio, that stuff.
Yep.
Okay, so and if you have a question, just go ahead and speak up because I have the thing minimized. Ish, whatever. I can see who's talking. Just say, hey, I have a question or something like that. Okay, so let me go over here. So this was your homework assignment for today, correct? You're supposed to have an add a card and add loyalty, where a card is a name, a start date, a minimum spend, and reward points. So we're going to create an object for that, kind of like we did last class. Similarly, we're going to create another object for a loyalty program. So it's going to be a name, what bank it's associated with, and then a current balance. And what did I say? Just after hitting submit on either of those screens, object should be created and displayed to log class. Okay, so just prove that you created an object and display it, right? Okay, so then we'll do kind of the next step for, so let me go ahead and do that first so you have kind of a working solution, and then I'll extend what we did from my model from last class a little bit farther to show list views and talk about singletons a little bit. So let me actually open up Keynote here. So just enough to keep you rolling and get some of you up to speed on Android. Okay, so I'll add some stuff in here later as we get to it, but let's go ahead initially. We're going to create objects for our card and our loyalty. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to design that. In here. So I'm going to have an object called credit card, and we decided that a credit card is going to have a name, a start date, a minimum spend, and then a number of reward points. So this is probably going to be a string. Right now, let's have our date also be a string, and then minimum spend and reward points are probably integers. So I'm going to say we're going to have a string. I already forgot what I call it. Name and start date. So we're going to have a string called name here. We're going to have a string called start date. We're going to have an int called min spend. And we're going to have an int called call it maybe point bonus, something like that. So that's what credit card will look like. Similarly, we'll have an object called loyalty program. And we decided a loyalty program is going to have a name, a bank affiliation, and a current balance. So probably a string, and an int. So this will be a string name, a string bank, or issuing bank, and then an int point balance, something along those lines. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create these two new objects in our Android project alongside of the object I wrote in class last time. So, you know, my little example that I'm expanding on is this object called student. So this is what we wrote in class last time, and this is what I'll write our kind of hint stuff for the next class in. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right-click. So I'm inside of the Java folder here. You might have a folder called source if you're in on the Windows side. But you should see your main activity, your page 2, and then whatever else is there. So I'm going to right-click here. I'm going to say new. I'm just going to create a plain Jane Java class. This is nothing special. This is an Android specific. This is just a Java class, just like our student was. And I'm going to name this class credit card. All right. And it's asking me if I want to add it to my Git repository. I'm going to say, go ahead and remember my answer here. So I'm going to say yes. So whenever I add something new to my project, I want it to also be kept track of in Git. That way, when you guys go and look at the Git repository later, it will have the stuff in it. Okay, so this is my new object called credit card. And just as we've designed over here, we decided a credit card is going to have 4 fields, 4 attributes: a name, a start date, a minimum spend, and a point bonus. So we'll go ahead and write those pieces. I'm going to just move that over so you can see this on the screen. So I'm going to always make them private, and then we'll loosen it if we need to. So this is going to be a private string name. This is going to be a private string, what I call it, start date. This will be a private int, I call it min spend and point bonus. All right, so these are the 4 pieces of information we're going to keep track of when we are creating instances of credit cards. All right, now I'm going to need a public constructor for this guy, and constructors match the same name as the class name. This is the class name. Here's the constructor name. I'm going to go ahead and take in those 4 things. So string name, string start date, int min spend, int point bonus. And like we learned last class, we can use the this keyword to specify whether we're talking about one of the fields owned by the instance of the class or the most local definition of a variable. So I'll say this dot name is equal to name. This dot start date is equal to start date. Dot min spend is equal to min spend. This dot points bonus or point bonus is equal to point bonus. All right, so that'll set up our credit card. Okay. And then since part of the assignment here was to, after we have something, we should be able to display it to the screen. If we go ahead and look at our student, we probably have a display method or something like that. Yeah, so we wrote a display method in here that shows a credit card, or in this case, showed a student in some sort of reasonable way. So we'll go ahead and write that method in here as well for testing. So we'll say public void, excuse me, public void display, and we'll go ahead and print out system.out.println, and why don't we say, we'll say name is this dot name. We'll concatenate with that with a space, maybe parenthesis, concatenated with this dot start date, concatenated with close parenthesis, and then maybe do a dash min spend. Concatenated with, I'm going to kick this down to the next line here. This dot min spend concatenated with maybe another dash, and then we'll call this bonus colon this dot point bonus. All right, so that's what it'll look like when we display a credit card to the screen. Now notice I was able to kick this down onto multiple lines. That's because languages like Java, statements are divided up by semicolons. So it doesn't care whether you put everything on a single line or you split it up between 30 lines. Now things would get a little dicey if I think if you split in the middle of a string, it might have had an issue with that. No, it actually was fine. Oh, it's because Android Studio fixed it for me. It went ahead and did this concatenation thing. Yeah, I think if you split in the middle of the string, it throws the Java compiler for a little. But regardless, you can. I just put this on multiple lines so you can see it a little bit better.
Do you want us? Oh, sorry.
Go.
Do you want us to have it all printed on one line, or can we have it printed on multiple lines, saying like
It doesn't
name
matter.
and then
It doesn't matter.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, this was just a test. You know,
Okay.
create a credit card and get it spit to the screen in some way. That way, you're convinced that you successfully created a credit card.
Got it.
Yeah, because I mean, pretty soon here, by the end of today, we're not going to be displaying it to the screen. We're going to be putting it up on a list, showing it differently. So this is just for our own sanity to know that it worked. Okay, and I'm splitting this up into different lines like this just so you can see it on the screen rather than it scrolling all the way off the screen over here to the right. All right, so that's what display will look like for our credit card. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to build our other object just so we have them. So keep in mind right now what we did is we just created our own variable type. Create a variable called credit card that can hold these 4 pieces of information. We have the ability to create an instance of credit card using this constructor, and then we can tell instances to display themselves. All right, that's what we just built, is that ability. Now, we're going to do the same thing for our loyalty program, which has 3 fields, 3 attributes associated with it, 2 strings and an int. So let's go ahead, we'll go in here. I'll click here to make the project slide back out again. I'll right-click on this package. I'll say new, and I'm just making a plain Jane Java class. And we're going to call this guy loyalty program because that's the new variable type I'm inventing. Okay, and this guy is going to have 3 attributes. We're going to have a private string name. That's going to be the name of the loyalty program. We're going to have a private string. I don't know if I could spell issuing bank, so we'll just call it bank. And then we're going to have a private int point balance. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and we'll create our constructor for this guy. So we'll say public loyalty program. And what I'm going to do, just to show you an example, you didn't have to do this for your assignment, but I'm going to actually create 2 separate constructors. I'm going to have a constructor that allows me to give it the name, the issuing bank, and an existing point balance. And then I'll have a second constructor that assumes the point balance is 0. All right, just because chances are when you first sign up for a Chase credit card, let's say, you know, then you get enrolled in the Chase Ultimate Rewards program, your current balance is 0. So you don't need to tell them that I have 0. They tell you that you have 0. All right, so I'll create 2 different constructors here. Just to extend a little bit what we looked at last time. So this guy's going to take in a string name and a string bank. And we'll say this dot name is equal to name. This dot bank is equal to bank. This dot point balance is equal to 0. So I'm hard coding a 0 in here, presuming that if this is a brand new loyalty program you just created, your initial balance is 0. Now let's just say that you're entering in a loyalty program that previously, you know, like you're loading it into this app and you already are a Chase Ultimate Rewards member and you already have 25,000 points or something like that. In that case, you might not want it to start off at 0. You might want to provide it with those other pieces of information. So I'm going to have a second constructor. This guy is going to take in all 3 of those pieces of information. So name, bank, and then point balance. Now, I already have the ability to set up the name and the bank here. It just so happens to 0 out the point balance. But I'm going to call upon the other constructor. So I'm going to say this name bank, like that. All right. And what this line here does, I'm kind of showing you some object-oriented stuff that those of you who haven't had tons of programming before, this will be all new to you. And those of you who had some programming before, this is one of those things you may have never seen before, calling upon one of your other constructors. All right. And I'll kind of explain what's going on here in a second. Let me actually throw something into our slides here while we're at it. We have this funny name called polymorphism. There are two or more methods, I'm going to say / constructors, since that's our example right here, that have the same name but a different number and or type of parameter. All right, so dealing with this through programming historically, whether we're dealing with object-oriented programming or procedural programming, polymorphism, an example of this is when you might overload or override a function / method. So you have more than one version of it. This happens through the inheritance model, most commonly, when you get a function from whatever object you're inheriting from and then you make it your own. But we're doing it within the same, so we are overriding existing methods that we already have through the polymorphism model that allows us to have more than one method with the exact same name, but a different number and or types of parameter. When I come back in here, constructors are a lot like methods, except they don't have return types. So we have a method here called loyalty program, another method here also called loyalty program. So two separate methods with the same name, but they have a different number and or type of parameter. So this guy takes in 2 strings. This guy takes in 2 strings and an int. Now, it's important to note here, let me just give you a quick example. I'm going to take this guy off here, and I'm going to say name2, bank2, just change the name of those variables. Okay? And then I'll say name2, bank2 in here as well. All right, notice it's not happy. The reason it's not happy is even though we have 2 separate functions that have the same name, they take the same number and or type of parameters. So both of these guys take in 2 strings. Java doesn't care that this guy's called name and this guy's called name too. They're the same function as far as Java is concerned. Okay, so if I want to have more than one method that does the same thing, I have to differentiate those guys. So now I have a constructor that takes just 2 strings and zeroes out the point balance. And then I have another one that takes 2 strings as well as a point balance. And then what he does initially is he calls upon his other constructor, the one that just takes in a name and takes in 2 strings, and has him do the initial setup work. And then I'll do my extra stuff here where I'll say this point balance is equal to point balance. Okay.
Dr. Littman, does the constructor have to match the same name as the class? This is a dumb Java question for a guy who doesn't know Java.
In Java and C#, the answer is yes. Swift, the answer is no. In fact, constructors in Swift are called a init. So it really depends on the language. But Java and C#, they do have to match the name of the class, case sensitive and all. Yep, so it's just more of a Java thing. Yeah, I can't think of any. Actually, I think those are the only 2 languages just off the top of my head. There might be another language that have that requirement, even though that's a pretty common requirement today because Java and C# are so popular. Python, the constructor is __ init __. So yeah, but so keep in mind then that the purpose of the constructor is to do the initialization of your fields, and then the other logic you might need to do. So what are we doing in here? We're taking in some pieces of information and we're matching them up to our fields. That's our initializer, okay? Or we can call it the constructor. But in Java, it does have to match identically. It's a rule. Okay? So my guess is, have any of you ever seen this syntax before, where you can call upon your own constructor from within yourself using this keyword?
Nope.
I know we had a couple of Java people in here, but so I figured I'd throw you something that was probably new.
And this namespace refers back to the class, correct?
Right, remember, so I think we wrote it in here last time, but this is how an object refers to itself from within itself.
Okay.
So when I say this here, I'm talking about this particular instance of loyalty program that we are in the middle of building right now. When I say this guy right here, when I say this, call name and bank, I'm saying I want you to call your own constructor that takes the 2 strings as parameter.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. And the thing is and I'll always tell you if I'm showing you something that is very language specific. I mean, I'm glad you asked about the naming convention, because in Java and C# they do need to match. But this whole calling your own constructor thing, this is not a Java specific thing. This is an object-oriented language approach type thing where you are able to call your own constructors using this keyword. So you could do this in C++, in Swift, pick your favorite object-oriented language. Okay, so this was a little bit of a stretch on why I did this. I just, I basically said there's 2 ways you can build a loyalty program, just with the name and the bank, and we go ahead and default the balance to 0, or with all 3 of those pieces of information, and then we'll go ahead and use our other tool here, which does the initial setup, and then we'll just differentiate point balance a little bit. All right, so 2 separate constructors, and Java figures out which constructor we mean by what parameters we send it. If we give it 2 strings, it'll call this one. If we give it 2 strings and an integer, it'll call this one. If we give it something else, it'll be upset. Okay, so that's our constructor for our loyalty program. We'll go ahead and write our public void display in here, and we'll say system.out.println. We have name, bank, balance. So this one's simple. We'll say this dot name concatenated with a dash. This dot bank concatenated with a dash. And this dot point balance. Okay, so that's what the display method for that dude does. All right, make some sense? So we have 2 different objects here that will allow us to build either credit card instances or loyalty program instances.
I've got a question.
Sure.
So like you created the 2 objects, like say one for loyalty and one for card.
Yep.
At the end where it's a private void or a public void, actually, yeah, public void for display. Does between those 2 objects, do they have to both be displayed the same word, or does it have to be distinguished between the 2?
Oh, like, these guys have nothing to do with each other. I mean, I just happen to choose display because that's what we're doing.
But I'm saying, like, will that interfere with the other display that you write in the other? No,
these are all completely independent.
Okay.
I can name these whatever I want. They could be the same, they could be different, because this display method here is owned by loyalty programs. Display method here is owned by credit cards. Display method in here is owned by students.
Got it.
Yeah, these guys are completely separate worlds.
Okay, cool.
Maybe a real life example would be you have a heart and so does a dog.
Okay.
Right? We don't call a dog's heart something different just because we don't want to confuse it with what we have. It's the same thing. It pumps the blood around.
Okay, got it.
All right. So those are our objects. So this is, fairly simple objects that just allow us to build these dudes and then prove we built it by spitting stuff out. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and build our 2 forms that allow us to instantiate these objects and then prove that we built them by spitting them out. So,
you guys hear me?
Yeah, just barely, but I can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I just switched to my work computer. For some reason, my mic on my other laptop wasn't working.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you well now. It's
okay, good.
clear. Okay. You have a question, or are you just testing to make sure your thing is working?
So this point balance that you have in the first public loyalty program, why did you initialize it to 0 instead of just setting it to point balance?
Because the constructor here only takes in the name of the bank. He doesn't take in point balance.
Okay, so somehow setting it to 0.
Yeah, let me just show you a quick example of that out here. We're going to see an example here soon, but let's just go ahead and test this real quick. So right now, I can come in here to my main activity, and I can create a loyalty program. Let's call this guy LP1, and this is going to be a new loyalty program, and I'll pass it Chase Ultimate Rewards, and this is from Chase Bank. And I'm just going to build it like that. Now I'm going to build a second one. And this will be called LP2. And this is going to be called, this is City Thank You Points. And let's say I already have 25,000 of those guys. All right, so I'm building 2 separate instances of loyalty program, LP1 and LP2, but I'm actually calling 2 different versions of the constructor. The very first constructor I'm calling is the one that just takes in the name of it and the bank. So it's going to call upon this constructor right here. I haven't provided it with the initial point balance. So it assumes I must be a new member, so it just initializes it to 0.
Okay, so it's like the equivalency of setting a string to an empty string.
Well, yeah, I mean, but don't get hung up on that. This is, the point of the constructor is to initialize all your values. You said, well, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say point value here or point balance here, right?
Yeah.
It's because I don't have a variable up here called point balance.
Okay.
I do have one here.
Yeah.
So in other words, like if you do enter in a point balance, it's going to use the second constructor, which is referring to the first constructor, and then it's entering that in.
Yeah. So now you see when I'm creating my second instance here, I'm passing it a string, but I'm also going ahead and giving it the point balance. So Java is going to notice here that, oh, you're calling the version of the constructor that takes 2 strings and an int, which is this one right here. So we'll go ahead and we'll set your name and your bank equal to those things by going ahead and calling the constructor. And then we'll set your point balance equal to whatever you actually passed in.
Got it.
If I have this written right now, Annie, the point balance equals point balance, variables resolve to their most local definition. So when I say this dot point balance is talking about this variable, and when I just say point balance here, it's still talking about this variable because I do not have one defined in here.
Okay.
So Dr. Littman, this brings up a question I've always wanted to know about overloading functions. Is it advantageous to do so? Because, I have a lot of code I read day to day that other people write, and some people overload and some people don't. And so if you just said loyalty program and you put something on the end of it to indicate this is a new loyalty program, and then something on the other constructor to, well, I guess you can't because of the way Java works. Okay, answer my own question.
Yeah, but if your general question is overloading a good idea, the answer almost always is going to be with questions like that is it depends. It's a good idea if it's the right use for it. It's maybe a bad idea if it's forced. We can almost say that maybe this didn't necessarily help us. One thing I don't like doing is judging the quality of code by the number of lines. So we can say here, well, I had 3 lines of code here, and rather than I really only needed 2 of these here, right? So I traded 1 line of code for 2 lines of code. But I did 1 extra line of code to initialize it to 0, which I then immediately undid by reinitializing it to the value that was passed in.
Does Java allow you to put a null or a default parameter or value in for a parameter if it's null or empty coming in?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yep. Or you can even define the defaults up here as well. In fact, first initial Java did not let you define defaults inside the parameters, but you could default it up here. But all variables in Java get a default value. So like integers are actually, the default value is actually 0. So we could have not put this in here, although I'm a big advocate of not assuming default values. Just because you know that the default value will be 0 doesn't mean that at some future point in time, you know, some
Java 11 changes something.
Yeah, some different platform is going to switch it to a -1 or something like that. So if you want it to be a 0, make it a 0. Okay, so for your homework, I would have expected most of you to write a constructor that takes in the 3 things here and just sets them all. This dot name equals name, this dot bank equals bank, this dot point balance equals point balance. You know, I just wanted to give you this little extra little nugget of you can call constructors from other constructors if it made sense for you. Okay, so there's our guys there. So coming back here to our main activity just to test this, I built loyalty programs 2 separate ways, and then we'll go ahead and build a credit card. So we have a credit card, CC is equal to a new credit card, and this guy takes in a name, a start date, a minimum spend, and a point bonus. So 2 strings, 2 ints. So we're going to call this guy the Chase Sapphire. And we're going to say that we got it on 1/1/19. We're going to say the minimum spend is 3,000. And the point bonus is 60,000, something along those lines. I think that's pretty accurate to what that card actually is. All right, then to test these things, we'll say LP1.display, LP2.display, and CC.display. Okay, so we created 3 variables using our new objects and then told each one to display itself. So when I run this now, if I go and look at logcat in here, I'm going to go ahead and clear it out. When it first launches, it's to go ahead and create those guys and spit some stuff out on the screen for us. So there's our chase program with our initial point balance of 0, because we use that version of the constructor. Here's our city thank you program, 25,000 point balance. And then here's the credit card, Chase Sapphire, blah, 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 minimum spend, all that jazz. All right, that makes sense? Okay, so let's go and build our couple of interfaces. I drew you pretty little pictures here, right? Oh, I think I have it in our as well. Man, look how awesome this is. That might as well just be the real interface in the App Store. All right, so we're going to have our 4 edit text with a button on top, so give you some practice building your interfaces. So this guy is going to be a new activity, maybe called add credit card activity, and this guy's going to be an add loyalty program activity. And we're going to have a vertical linear layout here and a vertical linear layout here, put a button, and then some edit text underneath. So go ahead and build that dude. I want to come into my code here. I'm going to right click. In this case, I'm creating a new activity, and I'm going to make it an empty activity. All right, we're going to call this guy add credit card activity. I think I spelled that mostly right.
Just for future reference, do you prefer that we, or just, I guess, as good practice, prefer that the code be written first and then the interface be created second?
Not necessarily. I mean, I would say good programming practice is to let your code grow organically, write the pieces as you need them. So we kind of designed it here on, in code. So we knew that we were going to need our objects. So it kind of made sense to build these objects first, because when we build our interface here and we fill in the stuff for these buckets and we hit submit, we're going to have to create instances of those objects. Now, could you have done it the other way? Sure, it didn't hurt anything, but you certainly, you know, you're going to need both of them for the situation to work. It maybe made sense here to go ahead and build it the way we built it, where we built our instances first because we were able to go ahead and test just them. So now we're confident that our instances of credit card and loyalty program work. So if we have any issues, we know it's something that we're breaking with our interface.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right, so I'm going to call this guy add credit card activity. We'll generate the layout file, go ahead and let it do its thing. Just make sure launcher activity is not selected. By default, it is not, because we don't want to replace the initial main screen we have. So go ahead and hit finish here. It's going to give me this beautiful new activity. And my design for it, rather than find it in there, I'll just go to it in here. So where's my new layout? Add credit card activity. Oh, here it is. Okay, so now I'm going to, this guy came with a constraint layout. I'll leave it in there for now. Sometimes I get rid of those, but whatever. So I'm just going to go into my layout here. I'm going to throw a vertical linear layout in here.
Is there a way that you can color or have like the background be a color? I tried looking, I couldn't figure it out.
For your linear layout, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. If you go to view attributes, let's just do a search and use like background. Gotta give me.
Is there a way for us to also get the cool Android bottom bar and top bar that you have? I couldn't get that into my IDE. I just got an empty white screen that's sad.
That's the eyeball thing.
The eyeball thing.
You see right below, go a little bit to the left and down. See, there's like, yeah, right there. Click show constraints. That's what you want to do. That will give you
he's talking about the stuff down here.
Yeah, I thought that showed up with that. I could be wrong.
Oh, if I turn those off, it's there. I was thinking
never mind.
This Nexus 4 thing versus these guys. I don't know.
Super critical to my ability to code, I'm sure. But
or maybe a chat theme thing. It's probably one of the. It probably is one of these buttons. It's probably just something dumb. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'm going to throw my submit button in here, and I'm going to. Oh, you were asking about the linear layout thing. So I think somewhere in here there's like a background color thingy. Code completion. No, that's not it.
You have to like type in the RGB code or something?
It's possible.
Okay.
Let's just find out what the thing is.
That's all right. If you can't figure it out, I'll figure it out. I'll just like Google it or something.
Yeah, I'm sure it's one of these guys. I would have thought it would be the background.
It is the background. You just have to put it in hexadecimal.
Yeah.
Oh, this guy here is expecting a hexadecimal value.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, here.
Oh, there it is.
We should be able to put in color. Oh, look at that.
Bummer.
So I didn't even have to type in hexadecimal. I could have just been the color. So now we're stuck with this. All right, so we're going to go ahead and make this guy say submit. Is that what I said to do? Make it say submit? Yep, whatever. All right, so then we're going to go ahead and put our edit text in here. So our first two, what are we doing here? We're doing credit card, right? So it's this one down here. So we're going to have a name, a bank affiliation, and a current balance. So 2 strings and then a number. So we do have some specialty edit text that make our lives a little easier. All it does is it associates the correct keyboard with it. So I'll drop a plain text in here, followed by another plain text. And I've decided I hate the background. So this
Yeah, that background's awful.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
You guys, oh my gosh.
Isn't this one, this is like the first and the last name, and then all along with the start date, the minimum spend, and reward points. Is that right? Is it the top one?
Yeah. We're doing, well, I don't know. What are we doing? Are we doing credit card or loyalty? We're doing credit card. Yeah. So name, start date, and then 2 integers. So 2 string integers. Thanks. So both of these are going to be normal text ones. And then I'm going to go down to this number one. I'm going to choose the normal number one because it doesn't need to be signed. It's just positive numbers. So I'll throw a couple of those guys in there. Okay, so all these guys are normal edit text. So if I click on one of these, notice this ID up here is called edit text. This next one is edit text 2, edit text 3, edit text 4. So they're all the same kind of animal. The only difference here is when I chose the plain text one, it associated the right kind of keyboard with it. Whereas the number one down here gives me the number keyboard. Just a little convenience thing so you don't have to go and change the stupid little setting there. Not a big deal. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and change the IDs for these real quick just so I can easily add them in. So this guy is going to be name ET. Let's see, it will differentiate, but it might be helpful for you to say credit card name ET, because we're also going to have a loyalty point name ET. And Java, well, Android Studio, when you say r.id. It will be able to differentiate between the 2 of those depending on which XML file you're currently working in. But it might confuse you as a human that they have the exact same name. So we'll call this guy credit card name ET. This guy is going to be, what is it, credit card start date, something like that. We could call that one just start date because it matches up. But we'll stick with our naming convention of credit card. So this is credit card start date. This is going to be minimum spend and reward points. Credit card. And I'd like it to be a lowercase. Then spend ET. And this is credit card bonus point. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and set the hint for each of these. Fewer attributes. So there's a thing called hint. So, well, I'm going to take the text out of this one to not say name anymore. And I'll set the hint to say credit card name. This guy will be start date. This guy is min spend. And then this guy will be bonus points. Okay, so we have these 4 things. We've named them something reasonable because we're going to need to access them from within our code using MVC. Now we need to give ourselves a function that this button will call. I don't need to name the button anything special because we're not going to be accessing the button directly inside of code. Instead, we're going to tell the button which function to call when we click on its on click. So we're going to go into our add credit card activity guy here. And I'll go ahead and give myself access to all those edit texts. So we're going to have an edit text. And we have credit card, name ET, credit card, start date ET, credit card, min spend ET, credit card, bonus point ET. And I'll make these guys all private. And then in here, I'll go ahead and set the, I'll look those up. So I'll say this dot credit card name ET is equal to the edit text version of this dot find ID r dot ID dot credit card name ET. This dot credit card start date ET is equal to the edit text version of this dot find ID by ID r dot ID dot credit card start date. Oh, I should have named that guy start date ET, but that ship is simple. Credit card min spend ET is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot credit card min spend ET. This dot card bonus point ET is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot credit card bonus point. Credit card bonus point ET.
Dr. Lindman?
Yep.
So like for the credit card minimum spend and then also the bonus points, do we want that as a edit, or do we not want that as an integer parse int?
No, because that you're right, but not at this point. All I'm doing here is I'm giving myself access to those edit texts. I'm not reading the text in from them yet.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. I see.
Yeah,
what you're
so
saying.
this is just MDC me grabbing those 4 widgets.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry about that.
Yep, so now I have those 4 widgets. Now I'll go ahead and write my onClick function. So this will be a public void. Let's call this guy OnSubmit Button pressed. I'll take a view V as a parameter. All right, and what this guy is going to do is he's going to read in these 4 different pieces of information. So we'll go ahead and we'll get, we'll say string credit card name is equal to this dot credit card name ET dot get text dot toString. It will actually convert it to a string by default there anyways, but I like to be explicit. And we'll say string credit card start date is equal to this dot credit card start date dot get text dot toString.
If you didn't instantiate the edit text objects on the onCreate,
would
you have any way to grab them in the onButton press, or would you need those? Because I was wondering the same thing as John. I was like, in my code, I went ahead and copied what you did, and I instantiated them like you've done right there. But I was wondering, like, is there a way to grab the edit text after the view has been, or the activity has been loaded? And you're,
yeah, I mean, we could put these exact same lines. We could dump these lines from here and just put them in here.
Okay, that's what I was curious.
Yeah, so but just at some point, you're going to have to give yourself access to it. And since you might hit the submit button more than once, in our world here, maybe you wouldn't. But if you were going to hit it more than once, potentially, you maybe would only want to go ahead and retrieve them once and then use them over and over again in here. As opposed to if you have this code sitting inside of the OnSubmit button, every single time you click the button, it's going to execute these 4 lines of code.
So you'd be instantiating it every time, a new set of objects every time you
but
hit.
still, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's not actually instantiating it because those edit texts, they already exist. You just happen to be getting the pointers to those 4
Oh, yeah, okay.
every single
Sure.
time. I mean, we're not talking about life-changing memory or anything, just, if you need it more than once, define it in one place and use it in multiple places. But if you want to keep your code kind of compartmentalized and not have too much extra stuff here, you could say that just from an organizational perspective, maybe it might make sense to be a little bit less code efficient, and that'll keep your programming world a little neater, something like that. This isn't life-changing things in here. All right, so we have a credit card name, we have credit card start date. All right, now we're going to say int credit card min spend, and this is what you were talking about, John. So in this, I'm going to read in this dot credit card min spend dot get text dot to string. This guy is going to be a string. I want to squeeze the integer out of that string. Now, realistically, we probably want to do some error checking and say, well, let's make sure the guy didn't put like hello world or something like that in there. But for us, we're going to assume that everybody's going to use our code perfectly. So I'll go ahead and say integer dot parseInt and then pass it the string I wanted to squeeze the integer out of. That makes sense? So this is what you were talking about, John. Up here, this is where I'm grabbing the edit text. Down here, this is where I'm getting the text from the edit text that I need to squeeze the integer out of.
Got it.
All right, and then here we're going to say credit card bonus points is equal to, oh, I like doing it this way. Credit card bonus point text dot to get text dot to string, and then I take that whole string. Now, if you notice the way I kind of do this, this will probably make you make errors less often. So I know that this guy's an int. So this is a bucket that I'm going to be tossing an int into. I know that this is my string that holds an int. So I type out the string first, then I cut it. Then I say integer dot parseInt, and then I paste the string I want to squeeze the int out inside of there. Maybe a little bit less error prone than kind of typing it all strung together. All right, so now I got my 4 bits of information here, and I'm creating a credit card. So I'm going to create a instance of credit card, and I'm going to pass it my 4 pieces of information. So this is going to be credit card name, credit card start date. Oops, wrong guy. This guy. Minimum spend. And bonus points. And I can kick this down so you can see it all on one line. Put the semicolon there at the end. So I've read in the 4 pieces of information. I've created my instance of credit card. And then I'm going to prove that it got created correctly by calling that guy's display method. Okay. Now I need to, a common mistake here is we wrote this on submit button press thing, but we have not hooked it up to our submit button yet. So let's go back out to our design there. This dude, we'll go to our submit button. We'll go to his on click, hit the drop down, and there's our on submit button pressed. So now whenever we hit this guy, it'll grab these 4 edit texts. Then, well, whenever the screen comes into existence, it'll grab the 4 edit texts. Then when we hit this guy, it'll grab the pieces of information from those 4 edit texts, squeezing the integers out of these last 2, building an instance of a credit card, then telling that guy to display itself. All right, so now we just need a way for this screen to show up. So I'm going to go back to my activity main screen here, and I'll just drop a button in here that says add credit card. So there's my button. We'll have the text say add credit card. All right, and then we want to go ahead and write an on click for this guy so that when we click it, it takes us to that credit card screen. So, I'm lost. Oh, here we go. Main activity. So we'll say public void on add credit card button pressed. Keeping in mind that you don't have to name your function anything about on pressed or anything like that. I'm just naming it very verbosely because now we know exactly what this function does. All right, and what's he going to do? We're going to create an intent. And this is going to be a new intent from the current context. And then we are going to, what's the name of that other screen? Add credit card activity.class. That guy. And then we will start activity I. Okay. And then we need to go and set that button's on click to call this function. And then this guy will generate the intent. It'll start that function or start that activity and then do all the stuff we just taught it to do. So let's go back out here to my activity main guy here. Here it says on click, add on credit card button pressed. Go ahead and test this here. My credit card, Sapphire 1119, minimum spend we'll say is 3,000, bonus points is 60,000. I'll hit submit. We'll come down here to our logcat and we'll see it got displayed there again. Here, I'll hit submit a couple more times. You see it's still showing it up there. If I change this to 5,000, you'll see it's creating a new, this one's 5,000 now. All right, so that makes sense how that screen works. All right, and then you would have just rinse, lather, repeat for the other screen. So let's just slap that together here real quick. So this application is up to date. Actually, just for, are there any questions about how that second screen would work, or is this a pretty good model for how that second screen will work?
No, that's good.
Okay, so then let me go ahead and I'm going to show you the next step for our next homework assignment. And I'm going to do this in terms of students. So I already have a screen here. Let's go to the next page. We are entering in some information about a student. Saying create student there. What does it do? Just spit it out to the screen now. Yep, spit it out to the screen. Now what we want to do is we want to show that student on the original screen. But our original screen is going to show, for you, it's going to show credit cards. I'm going to show you, well, yours is going to show credit cards and loyalty programs. But for right now, I'm going to show student information. So instead of this being printed out to the screen like this, it's going to display all the students we've built inside of a what's called a list view. All right, but I'm going to start off by creating a simple list view. And just for time here, I'm going to go to my layout folder. I'm going to right click on that guy. And I'm going to say I want to create a new layout resource file. Okay, and we're going to call this guy, call it student list view actually has to be all lowercase. Row. And I'm just going to go ahead and create it initially. Notice it says that this guy is going to be a constraint layout. Ultimately, this isn't the way we'll build list views, so I'm just going to give you some code to replace it with. All right, so this guy currently is a constraint layout. I'm going to go into the text for this, and we're actually going to replace the constraint layout with just a text view. So we can pull that off here by, I'll go here to the design. I'm just going to drag a text view in there so I have one. Come back out here to text. I'm going to steal this text view, paste it here, then get rid of the constraint layout. So this guy is the top level. All right, so now this guy is giving us some errors because we're missing a couple of fields in here. Let me paste and show you the fields that we're missing. I just threw it in this real quick before class. So we'll see the difference here. All right, so the thing it was missing is this piece up here that we had from our constraint view. So if I go back here,
So could you post that snippet on Slack?
yeah, here I can give it to you right now, but then it's also going to be up on the.
Oh yeah, it'll be on GitHub.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you want it right now?
Nah, I'll just grab it from GitHub then.
Yeah. So really, what you needed is this piece right here that told us the whole thing about what a text view is and where it came from. So that scheme Android APK blah blah blah. Okay. So I'll go ahead and dump this last piece because we're building a simple row for what's called a list view, and that row is only going to have a text view in it. So it's pretty simple. And so we needed to build almost like a, what's funny is to make a simple list view, we actually have to build a layout that isn't part of what Android Studio will build by default. Now, next week, we'll look at building more complex list views, and then we'll actually be able to use our normal layout thing. So for right now, our simple list views are just going to hold strings. This is good enough. Okay, so that's what this guy is going to be. Now, in order for us to build, let me go back here to my activity main, this guy. All right, so this screen here has a bunch of crap on it already. I'm going to go ahead and just throw a list view here at the bottom. So we're going to create a, is it under containers? Actually, it's under legacy right now. So under legacy, we have this thing called list view. The new way of doing this is something called, you use these things called recycler views. It is more efficient, but this is far easier to work with. So I'm going to throw a list view in here. So it's going to give me a dude that looks like this. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this guy. We're going to call this guy student list view. All right, so I'm going to give myself access to this guy. Now, initially, what I'm going to do here, now I am going to give you a little bit less than I gave you last week, but I'm going to give you all the pieces you're going to need to connect together. All right, so let me go ahead and give myself access to that. I'll get rid of this stuff in here. Up top here, I'll say private list view, and we'll call this guy student list view. And we're also going to have something called an array adapter. this guy list adapter. All right. And then inside of our code here in onCreate, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly create a string array. Name, call it Bible books. All right. Just the first several books from New Testament. And this is just a collection of strings. So what I want to do is I want to fill that list view up with the books from the Bible right now. Later on, it's going to be, in my world, it would be students. In your world, it's going to be credit cards as well as loyalty programs. Okay? But just the string version of those, like we've done right now. Later on, we're going to probably have like logos and stuff like that when we look at more complex list views. But so I have this array, this collection of strings. Now, keep in mind, these could be student names, right? This could be student information. It just happens to be the names of Bible books. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up my array adapter. So this dot list adapter is equal to a new array adapter of type string. Now, array adapters take a, oh, what do they take as a parameter? Is it this? Then it's r dot layout dot student list view row is what I'll put in there for right now. And then they take in my collection, which is Bible books. Let me kick this down a line so you can read it all. All right, so I'm setting my list adapter equal to a new array adapter. This is something called generics, so this is an array adapter of strings. Don't worry about that for right now. I'll differentiate that next week when I show you how we're going to build our own custom array adapters, because this will be an array adapter of credit cards and an array adapter of loyalty programs or whatever we called it. But for right now, we're using a built-in type called strings to make a simple list view. All right, so just this is the syntax for right now. And we build this guy in terms of the current context, just like we build intents. We tell it, this is the layout for each row of our list view. So that's our student list view row that we just built. And then here's our collection. Right now, it's going to be a collection of Bible books. In your assignment, it'll be either a collection of credit card strings. So that is the string version of each credit card. So I'm going to make you think about that a little bit. You know, because obviously the first assignment was too easy. You got to make it a little bit more difficult each time, right? Because if you're not spending half the week crying, you're not doing it right.
I mean, we don't have to reach that level.
What's this?
I said we don't have to reach that level.
Well, I'll tell you what, John. So if you send me a picture, or actually a video of you actually crying, next week I will bring you one of my unicorn hats that you can wear.
Ooh. That might be worth it.
I thought those unicorn hats were for a Grace event.
Well, you can use it for a Grace event too. Yeah, I've been sending some of you like pictures of all the crap I'm getting off of that rebate.
Oh my gosh, are they from that website?
Oh yeah.
Oh no.
Oh my gosh, I got some awesome stuff. I got unicorn hats. I got all these pills for different things. I got my prenatal vitamins.
I got my mushroom supplements.
Yeah, I got those today too. I got my maximum shred body rip gravy. That stuff's awesome. And the thing is, I'm taking all these pills, and my wife keeps screaming at me, like, do you even tell her these are going to interact with your medicines? And maybe look up a couple of them. So I decided.
You could probably skip the prenatal.
Yeah, I do. He convinced me to skip the prenatal vitamins because
Like,
of the
there's a lot
iron.
of good stuff in there. You don't even have to eat cereal, like all those good
I
vitamins.
know. Well, I mean, I already take a normal multivitamin, but the prenatal has iron in it. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so we went through the whole process of looking up all my pills, but now she wants me to find a place to store all my extra crap. Okay, so in any case, this is going to be our list adapter. So what this does is it takes an array of strings in our current world and adapts it for a list view using this layout for the row. Okay, then what we do is we say this dot student list view dot set adapter, and we're going to set the adapter to this dot list adapter, the guy we just built. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit play here, and we should see that we have a nice list there on our first screen with row. Oh, I never actually got my student list view. I tried to use this guy without actually getting him. So I need to go ahead and get that guy. So I'm going to say this dot student list view is equal to the list view version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot what do they call it, student list view. All right, now I have access to that dude. So before it would have been a null pointer exception because I was trying to do stuff with this object that didn't exist. All right, there's our Bible books. Okay, and if we want to see that this guy does by default scroll, I'll go ahead and just quickly create a string array, let's call it AR of stuff. This will be a new string array of size 1,000, and then I'll say for int I 0, I is less than 1,000, I plus plus, and I will just fill this guy up with, so this will be AR of stuff at bucket I is equal to banging on keys concatenated with I. And then instead of passing this guy Bible bucks, then I will pass it this other array of stuff I just built that has 1,000 things in it. And then you'll see that it now scrolls. All right. That makes sense?
So because we were doing credit cards and the loyalty programs, how do you want that to look on our screen?
Well, it would probably look the same thing as we had out here in Logcat, so it'll probably be something along these lines. You know, the text for it, or you could just choose just to have the name of the credit card or something like that. Let me give you a quick helper for doing that, and then I'll maybe even just give you a quick sample for credit cards, or a quick sample for students, rather.
But then do we need 2 list views? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you'll need 2 list views
Okay.
for yours. If you wanted, you could put them on 2 separate screens, because I haven't shown you how to have 2 different ones on the same screen yet. But if you just stack them on top of each other inside of a vertical linear layout, they'll be fine because you see that they scroll on their own. So we might be starting to get a bunch of stuff squished onto that first screen, but that's okay. So if maybe you just have a list view at the top and another list view below that and just call it a day with your few buttons up there, it might not be the prettiest interface in the world, but it should function. All right, so what I'm going to do here is, and we'll talk more about it next week. So I want to get us out of here before too much longer, since technically we're not even supposed to have class, but you want this stuff for your homework. I'm going to be introducing a concept that some of you maybe have heard of before. It's called a singleton. So that says it's a good idea to store data that needs to be shared among, in our case here, I'm going to say multiple screens in a single place. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new object in here. I'm going to right click on this. Now, one thing you'll notice here, if you go under new, you can actually create a singleton, wherever that is in here, singleton. But I don't do it that way. I don't like the way that they do their built-in singletons. So I actually just create a normal plain Jane Java class. And I usually call this guy core for no good reason, just it's my core data storage place, I guess. So go ahead and hit OK. So it's just a plain Jane looking Java class. All right. And what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to have a, we're going to have a public static student array of the students. All right. Similarly, I'm going to have a public static string array called the student strings. All right. Now, next week, I promise you, I'm going to show you how do you create a list view of students. But right now, we only know how to do list views of strings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, actually, we'll go ahead and initialize this guy to be a new student array of size 1,000. And this guy will be a new string array of size 1,000. And then I'm also going to then have a public static num students. It's going to start off as 0. That's going to be an int. All right, so all of these guys are what are known as static variables. That means they're owned by this class. So I would access this guy by saying core.numStudents, core.theStudents, core.theStudent strings. All right, so what I'm going to do back out here in main is, or in our onCreate in our main activity, is I'm going to go ahead and just create a bunch of students, just sample students. You know, they could have come from my enter student form. So let me come back here to that. Now, just as a reminder, when we build a student, we need a first name, a last name, and an age. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and fill up my array of students with a bunch of students, maybe 100 students. So I'm going to say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than 100, I plus plus. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say student S is equal to a new student. This guy takes a first name, a last name, and an age. So I'm going to say F name concatenated with I, L name concatenated with I, and then we'll just say the age is I. All right, so this is going to have a whole bunch of boring students named F name 0, L name 0, age 0, F name 1, L name 1, age 1, so on and so forth. But technically, they're students, right? Then I'm going to say core dot the students at bucket core dot num students is equal to S. Then I'm going to say core dot the student strings at bucket core dot num students is equal to, I'm actually going to change this to 1,000 because we do need to fill it all the way up for the way that you're going to have to do it this first time. Yeah, so for your homework assignment, you might choose to make it like 5 or something, and then make sure you use your form to create 5 credit cards or 5 loyalty programs, or maybe you set it to, for easy testing, set it to 2. Bottom line is for your homework, whatever size this guy is, you're going to have to fill it all the way up. I'll show you the alternative next week, but for a simple list view, you're going to have to fill the entire array up. Otherwise, it'll have a bunch of null values. Now, one thing you could do, in fact, here, I can, this will give you the cheat way out of it to make your life easier. You can do this. I'll keep this at 100, but before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than, we'll say core dot the student strings dot length, I plus plus, and I'm just going to say core dot the student strings at bucket I is equal to n slash a. Actually, let's call it unknown student, something like that. So technically, that entire array will have strings in it. There will be 1,000 strings in that array. I'm going to change the first 100 of those strings to be representative of actual students. Okay, so first thing I do here is fill the entire array up with stuff. That way the list view works. Then I'm going to go back through and overwrite the first 100 buckets with actual student information. So I'm going to create a student. I'll go ahead and load that student into my core the students array, even though I'm not going to be directly using it for this week's homework. But then I want to have the student strings at that same position be equal to the string representation of this student that we just created here. So I'm going to come into student, and I'll just steal from display. I'm going to say public string, we'll call this guy toString. I'll just steal the same thing we had in there. So we're going to have this guy return, instead of printing a string, he's going to return a string representation of this student. So it's going to return the string, first name, space, last name, space, parenthesis, age, parenthesis. Okay, so this is how we're going to represent students. But instead of printing them out like we did with display, now we're going to be able to ask a student to give us the string version of themselves, which will then allow us to do this. So I'll set the student strings at the same bucket, num students. So initially num students is 0. So bucket 0 of the students will be the student. Bucket 0 of the student strings will be the student string representation. Then I'll say core dot num students plus plus. So the next time through, it'll give us a student at bucket 1, then bucket 2, then bucket 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now I'm not going to use the Bible books here. I'm not going to use our array of stuff here. I'll go ahead and, I mean, these guys can still exist. I'm just not going to use them. But so down here, my adapter, instead of my array of stuff, I'm going to say core dot the student strings. All right, so this guy, this list view is going to show all of the student strings that are associated with the string version of all the students that I automatically created here. But maybe in your homework, you would have created them as a result of putting credit cards and loyalty programs into your forms. That makes sense? So let me.
So in other words, you're just hardwiring them in right now, or hard coding them in. But then we would create the function where, as we enter it into the text view, it would get entered into there and then put into that scrolling form or whatever.
Correct. And I'm gonna show you one little hint here in a second once you see this guy work, and then I think that should give you enough to be dangerous. All right. So see how we have student representations now for 0, last name 0, 8, 0, so on and so forth. So these are all from our students. All right, so I'm just going to give you a little hint here. I'll go into core, and I'm just going to say public static credit card. That's the one we read in, right? Credit cards. And by default, this guy will be null. Now on my screen for, where's my add credit card? Add credit card activity. After we submit, we're displaying the credit card stuff. But notice inside here, I also have access to core. So the important trick here, the important thing that I want you to really understand here is that when I'm inside of add credit card activity, I have access to all the stuff that's inside of core. When I'm inside of main activity, I have access to all the stuff that's in core. When I'm inside of page 2 activity, I have access to all the stuff that's in core. That override needs to be there first, so I could say core dot. So all the stuff that's in core is available here as well. So that singleton that we created called core is accessible from any screen in our application. Okay? So for your homework, what you want to have happen is you want to have a main screen go away. There we go. And this guy will be, these are our list views. That'll be a list of credit card strings. This will be a list of loyalty program strings. So now when you go and you add something on one of these screens here and you hit submit, it's going to add something. It's going to do something with this global thing up here called core. Because core is accessible from this screen, as well as this screen. All right, so your list of credit card strings is going to show, it's going to have your adapter based on the credit card strings that is inside of core. Your loyalty card strings, or loyalty program strings, will be from, the adapter will be based on what's in core. But when you create something here for a credit card or here for a loyalty program, you're going to update something in core, probably an array of credit cards as well as an array of credit card strings. That way, when you go back to the previous screen, this guy will update. Because array adapters keep up to date with the pointer to the array that you connected it to. So the idea should be you come to this screen, you add one credit card, it adds something to core. When you come, then when you hit the back button, it takes you back here. Now credit card should have one real credit card in it. And maybe all the other ones say unknown credit card, like we did today to fill the array up with blank cards. Similarly for the loyalty program. That make sense?
Yep.
All right. So I'll go ahead and commit this to GitHub. So
What was the whole, like, you taking off the constraint view? What was that for?
That was for our row for our list views. So I'll show you that here in a second.
Okay.
Okay, so GitHub is updated. So this list view that we have out here,
Yeah.
this is a text view, this is a text view, this is a text view. When we built that list view here inside of main activity, when we built the adapter actually, the adapter was built in terms of r.layout.studentListViewRow.
Okay.
That's the dude that we created that only had a text view in it. So that's here inside of layout. That's this guy right here, which is just a text view.
So literally it's pulling the main activity is pulling a layout and putting it within the main activity.
And putting it within an array adapter. But yeah, we're doing that from within main activity. Array adapters, the point of an array adapter is to adapt a collection of things, in our case, a collection of strings, to something that knows how to display those things. In our case, a list view. So list view displays things using a layout. This is the layout that our particular simple list view is using. The array adapter says, tell me what you want to show and tell me where you want to show it. So this is our simple version of this. Next week, we'll look at a custom array adapter that will allow us to build out a interface for a credit card that maybe has the name of the card on one line. And then beneath that might be the sign up date. And then maybe over to the right is like a stacked version of the points versus bonus, or minimum spend versus bonus. We can make it look more custom. We won't make it look beautiful because I'm a bad designer, but it won't just have to be a single string like this. We'll be able to have it in multiple places.
Sweet.
Make sense?
So what you're saying is we need to make another XML file with just that code.
Correct. Yeah, and that's what I did here. So I went into layout here. The way I created this guy right here, I'm sorry, not that guy. This guy right here is I right-clicked on layout. I said new. Then I said, you actually can pull this off. I can show you a little bit of a cheap way to do this anyway. Something widget. Yeah. Rather than show you the cheap way, I'll just show you the top level thing. If I can get to the full path of what text view is, I think it's like Android dot, yeah, here it is, widget.textView. So you can actually steal this guy here, android.widget.textView. And then when you go into layout and you say new layout resource file, and I'm going to call this guy, let's call it another underscore row, something like that. The root element of this guy by default is constraint layout. I'm going to change it to Android widget text view. And then say OK. So it'll build a text view there for me. All right, and this is in a file called another row. And now what I can do is I can come back to main activity, and instead of using r.layout.studentListViewRow, I can say r.layout.another row. And this guy should still work, I believe. Yep, so there's all your text views.
Okay.
Yeah, so punchline for us is you need to have so now you have two versions. I'll push this as well. You need to have a simple XML file where the top level element is a text view. One way or another. You can either copy my original code from list view row, or you can make the root element a text view, which is an android.widget.text view. That makes sense? All right, so I will get the assignment put up, and then I'll be due before class starts next week. Like last week, if you want to work in groups, stuff like that, that's fine. I'll be around all week. Feel free to ask questions and things like that. But I am asking you to do a little bit more than you had to do last week. Last week, I gave you basically the whole solution and you just practice the points. Now I've given you most of the solution. At least I've given you all the little pieces of the solution. Now you need to connect a few of those dots that I didn't necessarily connect before. Make sense? But every piece of the solution is in the code we wrote today. All right, so I will figure out how to stop the recording. Is that this guy here? Yeah, I think that's this guy here. Here, let me go ahead and push this before I forget. So we'll do commit. And then commit and push. Okay, and that should be up there. And then what happens if I click this? My recording thing. So I want to make sure I get the video uploaded. I'm guessing it's stop recording.